Hi guys, and welcome to the podcast. I am, of course, your host and podcast founder, Lawrence Francis. I just want to take this opportunity to give you a quick overview of this series, which features coverage of the Dublin Wine and Cheese Festival, which took place at Iveagh Gardens in central Dublin between the 8th and the 11th of August 2019, which will air on the Interpreting Wine podcast between episodes 289 and episode 300. This will feature a mixture of talks and one-to-one interviews with some of the leading lights in the Irish and international wine scene. This consumer fair is now in its second year, and I was seriously impressed with the quality of speaker overall. I think that events of this type really lend themselves well to being covered for the podcast, and would love to feature more events of this kind in the future. So without further ado, here is today's episode of the Dublin Wine and Cheese Festival 2019 series. Today's episode of the podcast sees the return of Lynne Coyle MW when she took the stage to deliver her talk, Yes Way Rosé. This features a tasting of 4 rosés, all with something a little bit different about them, as well as a little bit of Q&A at the end of the episode. Enjoy.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to drink rosé regardless of the weather, which is going to prove, hopefully, one of my points that you can drink rosé any time of the year, whatever the weather. I know rosé is one of those wines that you tend to think about as a summer wine and you just keep it for the warm weather. But hopefully, as we go through the wine styles this afternoon, you'll see that there's different styles and different drinking opportunities with rosé. The first thing to say about rosé wine is that any rosé drinkers in the audience? Yay, good. So we have already, I'm speaking to a crowd who are rosé lovers. And the people who don't drink rosé, you don't like the style, or you just haven't bothered to try it, or no? Worried it's too sweet? Because historically rosé wine was really quite sweet, and it's one of those wines that you kind of get put off because as you're growing up you might have rosé wine at a party or somebody hands you a glass of rosé and it tends to have lots of residual sugar and it tends to put you off. But we're about to have 3 dry rosés this afternoon, and as rosé has become more fashionable, as it has over the last few years, then the dryness levels of rosé have never actually changed. It's just that we're seeing more dry rosés in the market in Ireland, and we've got an appetite for dry rosés. And the major thing I would say, the difference between the dry and the sweet rosé, is that dry rosé is really appropriate for food, whereas for sweet rosés it's actually harder to match with food. So without further ado, we'll get on to the first wine, which is Domaine L'Hostal from the Languedoc in the south of France. And the first thing to say about this wine is, has anyone heard of Chateau Lynchebage in Bordeaux? So this property is actually owned by Chateau Lynchebage. So suffice it to say that no amounts of love and investment have gone into the vineyards on this property and also into the winery. So I think it represents one of the best value rosés that we have in the portfolio, simply because there's really good investment behind it. But there's an individual winemaker there, an individual estate manager running the vineyards and running the winery. So although Chateau Lynchebage own this property, the individuals in situ have absolute freedom to interpret the grapes, to interpret the soil, and to interpret the microclimate around the area into the style of the wine that they feel best represents the wines from this area. So it's a blend of Grenache and Syrah, or Shiraz, Syrah and Shiraz being the same grape. It used to be very simple. You used to be able to say that Shiraz was what the New World countries called Syrah, and the French all called Shiraz Syrah. But now the French, in many cases, are calling Syrah Shiraz, and the New World guys are calling the same Shiraz Syrah. So there's no rule anymore. You just have to know that that's the same grape and stick with it, as it were. So the first thing to say about this wine is beautiful, delicate, gorgeous pale colour. And this is very much the fashion of rosés these days. The other thing to say is that the colour essentially comes from what's slightly rudely referred to, but it's a technical term in winemaking, skin contact. It sounds much more exciting than it is, to be honest. It's the length of time that the white juice stays in contact with the skins of the grapes. more or less all red grapes have white juice. There's a couple of exceptions, but if you press red grapes into a glass, you'll basically see that the juice is white. So in order to get red wine, or in this case in order to get rosé wine, the black grape skin has to be in contact with the white juice to take the colour. And the less time that you have the black skins in contact with the white juice, the less colour you'll have. So in this case, this wine has about 2 hours of 1.5 hours skin contact, not very much at all. And they are looking for this really delicate, pale, elegant colour. And this colour is based on Provence rosé. And Provence rosé is the rosé that's persevered when no one else was making rosé and selling huge quantities of rosé in Provence in the south of France. That this is their wine style, if you like, and this colour is what they've actually persevered with. So this is from just slightly further along the coast in the Languedoc, and it's actually in the Iveagh region, and the concentration of the colour is very, very delicate based on that Provence colour. Do people like this colour? And are people drinking darker coloured rosés, or do people who drink rosé tend to stick with the paler? You like this colour? Okay, great. Okay, excuse me a sec. Sorry, I forgot my time when I started. Can you just give me a 5-minute thing? Because I could be up here for 2 hours, guys, and you don't want that. So. Okay, I could literally be up here for 2 hours. Aaron can testify to this. He's had to endure it before. Okay, so let's taste the wine. So, it's hard to smell the wine from these glasses, but if you give a slight agitation and smell, the oxygen should release some of the aroma, and hopefully what you're going to discover is that sort of slightly strawberry, raspberry summer fruits. This would be easier to do at home, it's just quite tricky in these glasses. Best wine glass is something that's slightly tulip shaped, it goes in at the top, holds the aroma inside the glass, and it just makes it easier to smell. You've tasted the wine, and a couple of things I want you to think about. So there's the concentration of the fruit on the palate, which hopefully you're picking up a bit of the strawberry and raspberry fruits on the palate. The other thing to think about is that you've got a slight salivation at the sides of your tongue, and that's acidity. And acidity can sometimes be quite a scary word when it comes to wine, and people say, oh, I don't want an acidic wine. The fact is, all wines have acid, and all wines need acid because it helps balance the alcohol and the fruit and all the other flavours, but it also allows the wine to age. So that acidity is really important. And the other thing to think about is everyone getting that slight salivation that I'm talking about. And if you're ever, and even red wines have acidity. So if you're ever trying to decide, has this wine got a lot of acid, such as a Marlborough Sauvignon drinkers here? So you will get that if you're drinking Marlborough Sauvignon, because Sauvignon Blanc is a really high acid white grape. So if you're ever thinking, I wonder what the acidity level is like on this wine, think about whether you've got that salivation at the sides of the tongue, and that really helps you assess. The other thing to think about this wine is, I'm sorry, you're going to get to enjoy it in a minute, but I'm giving you the technical spiel to begin with because it's interesting to get a bit of thoughts about how to approach it. So the other thing to think about is, think about the aftertaste, which is the taste that's left in your mouth even now. Even though we've tasted the wine already, I still have a touch of fruit on the palate, still got a bit of acidity there, and I've got an overall freshness on my tongue, as it were. So that suggests to me that this is actually a pretty good quality wine, because that description of what's left in the mouth afterwards is called the length. So if you've got a decent glass of wine and you've still got some intensity after you've had a sip, and therefore you're going, well, actually this has got a bit of length, so therefore it's good quality. Try it with a cheap wine, you know, that you just try it with a €6 or €7 Tuesday night bottle of wine or something, and try it with something that you've spent a bit more money. And in truth, wine is one of those things, I would say up to about €20, you genuinely are getting a real quality increase every time you spend a couple of extra quid, particularly in Ireland when you're looking at €4 a bottle, duty and VAT. So it's worth trading up from 7 to 9 and 10, because at every level you're getting more wine in the bottle. So this is a good quality, it's got a bit of length, it's got a bit of intensity, And the final thing to think about this wine is that lovely fresh acidity. You didn't think it was going to be this complicated, did you? You just thought you were coming here for a sip of wine. So the other final thing to mention is that acidity makes this wine an absolutely perfect food match. That sort of acidity would be delicious with things like, smoked salmon, goat's cheese, but it would also go really well with fish, with salads, with pasta. That lovely freshness will keep this as a really versatile wine style. So, do we like it? Yeah, good. And I love this because it's got you can see the circle on the label, see straight through, so you can really see what the colour is, and really, if I missed anything, sorry? This isn't organic, no. Sustainable farming, but not organic. I'll talk a bit more about at the end with the South African wine, because they've got quite interesting farming philosophy. So not organic, but sustainable. The thing about organic is it's actually depends. The reality of organic is your climate is a really major factor as to whether you can farm organically or not, even with grapes. So what is quite fashionable at the moment is that lots of wineries are actually veering towards sustainable farming and biodiverse farming rather than just purely organic. And there's a bit of a challenge in the EU at the moment because there are certain molds and fungi in the vineyard, mildews, which can only really be treated with copper sulfate. And copper is a heavy metal that's proven to stay in the soil for over 100 years and doesn't break down. So there's some people, some winemakers and wine growers who choose not to be certified organic because they don't like the fact that the only treatment for mildew in the vineyard is copper sulfate. And as I say, it's a heavy metal. So some farmers are choosing to farm sustainably rather than be certified organic. It's interesting to see where that's going to go in the next few years, because the EU wants to stop the use of the copper sulfate, but there isn't actually another proven and successful organic alternative at the moment, so it's an interesting conundrum. Anyway, so number 2 then. The other thing to mention on this is that the Syrah and the Grenache are both giving something slightly different to this wine. So you're getting a touch of savoury character from the Syrah, touch of pepper, and maybe that slightly Mediterranean herbal type character. Grenache gives a bit of concentration, a bit of body, and to some extent a touch of an aroma profile as well. So number 2 is Rose, which I will confess is my wine. I didn't choose it for this afternoon, I was asked to do it, so that's my excuse. So we talked about, so this is from Navarra in Spain. This is also farmed sustainably, and it's a small artisan wine project. There was only one tank of this wine made. Myself and another lady winemaker called Iveagh, and basically it's made in a non-intervention winery, which means there's no pumps, it's gravity. Everything is as natural as possible, including in this case it was a wild yeast fermentation. Lots of wineries inoculate wheat yeast into wine because it's a really functional way to ensure that you get a good fermentation, that the fermentation finishes and there's no bacterial spoilage. To use natural yeast is quite tricky because there's lots of disasters that can happen between picking the grapes and actually the final wine. But I was very keen that we used a natural yeast for this wine because I wanted to express the soil, the region, the terroir and so on. And I think in using a natural yeast to start the fermentation, you end up with a bit more flavour and a bit more roundness in the palate is the theory. That's why we used a natural yeast. This has a 3.5 hour skin contact, so you can probably see that is actually a tiny bit darker than the first wine, and that's basically to do with the decision to do a bit longer skin contact. And whilst the paler rosés may be fashionable, the challenge around going for a very, very pale colour and limited skin contact is that you can compromise your aroma profile and you can compromise your flavour profile. So Iveagh, who normally does 10 hours skin contact on rosé, was really, really worried that if she reduced the skin contact, we wouldn't get the fruitiness on the nose or the palate. I was really worried that I didn't want a dark rosé, and to be honest, I think the balance here is perfect. It's 3.5 hours, it's probably still a bit dark in my opinion, but that's just me. but she's definitely not compromised the fruitiness either on the nose or palate. This is a really fruity Grenache, and I think you can see quite a marked difference in the style between the first two wines. Now, my idea with this wine was that it was going to be very, very food friendly. So when people ask what the food match for this is, it's Spanish wine, so I always say tapas. But frankly, I think you can match it with more or less anything. Because again, if you think about that acidity, it's there again on the palate, freshness at the end, and you've still got fruit as an aftertaste. So still quite concentration on the flavours of the fruit, but you've got that still lovely freshness in the end. The label actually on this wine's called Rose. I'm sure I don't need to tell you Irish in the room that that's Irish for rose. It's also Scottish for rose. And Charles Rennie Mackintosh was an architect from Glasgow, and that's a kind of Charles Rennie Mackintosh typeface with Mackintosh roses. So it's a real Celtic influence label. Is there anything else that I want to talk? Oh yes, the other thing that's interesting on this wine is that with rosé it's quite often fermented in stainless steel, which really helps control temperature. And this wine, because we were fermenting with wild yeasts, we fermented it in concrete rather than stainless steel. And that's another reason why you get a bit more palate texture, is because concrete is slightly porous. So although stainless steel is really easy to control in terms of temperature, concrete is almost stable in terms of temperature because the tanks are so thick. So a few interesting different tweaks to the winemaking on this, on the rose. So on the third wine, I didn't explain the names. So a few years ago when I first joined O'Brien's and we were talking about what wines we could focus on and so on, I'd come over from the UK and I'd seen very successful rosé promotions in the UK, and particularly during the summer. So when I said in O'Brien's that I wanted to do a rosé promotion, everybody just fell about laughing and went, "Are you joking? Like, seriously, this won't work." But anyway, I pressed ahead and I bought 12 different rosé wines to promote over the course of the summer. But we decided that was actually quite a complicated message, and how were you going to explain the difference between all the rosés? So we decided to go for a Sex in the City type vibe. So we actually gave all the wines a personality. So there was the sexy one, the foodie one, the stylish one, the serious one, etc. And to be honest with you, we did quite flashy bling, gold lettering and pink posters and so on. Marketing manager was on holiday, so when she came back she nearly died. So otherwise I wouldn't have got away with it. And to be honest, we've stuck with the personalities for the rosé because we haven't actually come up with anything else. And we know ourselves from our customers that when they say, "Oh yeah, I always have the foodie one," or "I really like the stylish one," or whatever. So I think it's worked really well. So that's why we've got these little descriptions on the wines. So the last wine is actually from South Africa, and this is a Pinotage, is a great variety. So we had a Grenache Syrah, we had 100% Grenache for rose, and now with the Delheim rosé we have the Pinotage, and this is 100% Pinotage. And Pinotage is a great variety that's indigenous to South Africa. This winery is actually in Stellenboch, and I actually don't know anywhere else in the world that grows Pinotage. If you ask me about virtually loads and loads of grape varieties are grown all over the world, even Gruner Veltlinger, which is indigenous to Austria, has now been grown in New Zealand. There's some in Napa and so on. I just don't know any. I've never heard of anywhere else that's growing Pinotage. There probably is, I just haven't heard of it. So this is a very specifically South African wine. And this winery are not organic, but they are actually following, they're certified biodiverse and they're certified sustainable. And this is very much a movement at the moment, that the feeling is, first of all, you have to have, because typically vineyards would be monocultures, where you've got rows and rows and rows and rows of vines. And we now know in farming that that isn't a particularly good way to go, because you're actually getting rid of diversity in terms of flora and fauna and also microorganisms in the soil. So there is very much a consideration at the moment that if you can introduce biodiversity into your farming, even of grapes, then you're actually creating healthier soils, which is creating a better microclimate around the vineyards, and also in the end hopefully a better ecosystem. So this particular winery, Delheim, is certified for biodiversity, and it's also certified for sustainability. And these guys also, being in South Africa, their social program is really strong. So their workers all have houses built for them. All the houses have vegetable patches beside them. They can grow their own food. They basically have school on the estate. They have playgroups on the estate. They transport the kids to school, to the bigger schools once children are older. And their houses and their land that their workers have automatically goes to the kids. So there's an entire future behind, and that's, South Africa are very advanced in this area, because obviously the political system was obviously quite challenging, shall we say. So anyway, back to the wine. No politics then. so here we are, 100% Pinotage, lovely pale colour again. Have a taste of this wine and see what you think. Sorry, I'm driving, so I know. So, lovely and fruity again. Nice and really intense fruit. This is a touch, it has a touch more what we call residual sugar. Tiny bit sweeter than the first two wines. It's not as dry as the other two, but again, I think it's fairly food friendly. But for someone who doesn't want something too dry, but they don't want something sweet, then I think this is a really good halfway house. And this is we sell a lot of this wine. This is probably the wine, we've had this wine in our range for something like 15 years. And it's done a really, it's got a huge following. I think over the 15 years, the colours get paler, the sugar levels have come down, but you can see it's still got a touch of sweetness there. So for someone who doesn't like it too dry, then this is an alternative style. Now, my final point on rosé is that I honestly believe that you can drink rosé at any time of the year. So every year I used to go on the radio and say, drink rosé with turkey. And I remember one of my Master of Wine colleagues, Martin Moran, phoned me after one of the radio things. He said, what is wrong with you telling people to drink rosé at Christmas time? And now I go to tastings and people say to me, we had a rosé with the turkey, and it actually works quite well. I actually stopped saying the rosé and the turkey thing because I get so much grief for it. But it's honestly, if you look at a lovely, you imagine that Lostal or the rose, those dry rosés with turkey. And a lot of people drink wine that at Christmas they maybe wouldn't drink at other times of the year. So it's a good style that kind of tends to please everyone. And I also think a picking bottle of wine looks gorgeous on the table at any time. But we are seeing now that rosé is selling not just in the summer, it's selling throughout the year. And these styles of wines are fantastic with things like sushi, with Asian foods, Thai food of any sort. It's a really good match, and you can have a bit of fun doing it as well. And things like the Delheim, that with the last wine, delicious strawberries, watermelon, that touch of sweetness just means that you can slightly have a bit more sweetness in your food. And also, finally, my plug for rosé is with cheese, because it actually works really nicely. You don't want anything too powerful. I mean, the general rule of food matching is powerful food, powerful wine. But if you imagine things like a nice chalky chèvre goat's cheese, manchego even with the rose, goat's cheese with the Lostal, that is a really nice match. As I say, nothing too powerful. I don't believe in food and wine matching rules, to be honest. I think people should drink what they want, when they want, and with what. But I would just say drink rosé at any time of the year, because I think it's such a versatile wine style. Did we enjoy the tasting? Yeah? Good, good. Any questions?
What percentage of their Stellenboch wine is in rosé?
What percentage?
Yeah.
It's actually, they make quite a lot of rosé because they were the first people to make rosé in that kind of quality level in Stellenboch. So they've actually got a huge following. And I know that even for ourselves, that's the wine that we sell most of from them. So they actually make a lot of rosé. It's considered the benchmark for Stellenbosch or even South African rosés. So in terms of actual percentage, I don't know, but I know they make a lot. Yeah. And they've been changing some of the vineyard plantings, taking out Shiraz and so on, and they've removed some Chardonnay. They've stopped doing Sauvignon. But Nora, who's the owner of the winery, said to me, we have to leave the Pinotage because we make so much rosé. So they can't, they have to stick with the Pinotage for the rosé. They make some red Pinotage as well. Any other questions? Oh, you're letting me off very lightly this afternoon. Sorry?
Blush.
Well, blush is historically, and I think it maybe still is, but blush was what was made in California from Zinfandel, so also a red grape. So the two famous brands would be Gallo and Blossom Hill, and those two styles, which are called white Zinfandel, were always technically called blush wines. And what you would find with those is that a lot of people, that's where they start to drink wine, is those kind of styles. So quite high levels of residual sugar. The wines are well made, but they are they're a sweeter style than any of the ones that we've had today. But again, they also have a lovely, pale, elegant colour. And I think that's what's quite challenging about rosé, is that you can look at it in the bottle and wonder, is that sweet or dry? But in general, and this is a sweeping statement, but in general, they're dry. Because if they're American, the two blushes the blush wines tend to be sweeter, but in Europe, it tends to be dry. A couple of alternatives would be in the Loire Valley. Cabernet d'Anjou and Rosé d'Anjou from the Loire tend to be a bit sweeter. So, was there anybody here today that... Sorry.
Another question. What are you seeing, or what's your kind of take on winemakers that blend white, red wines together? And is that rosé?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, what Lawrence was saying there, he's asking about blending red and white. In some parts of the world, it's illegal to blend red and white wine. So in Europe, you can't blend red and white to make a rosé. You've got to bleed the grapes, as I described, where you've got some of the colour from the black skins, except in Champagne, because in Champagne, because the wine is sparkling, it's quite hard to get colour stability. So they are allowed to blend red and white wine. But other parts of the world, they can blend red and white wine to get rosé. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be the maceration of the skins with the white juice. Good question. Have I converted anybody to rosé this afternoon? Yeah. Good.
So my girlfriend volunteered me for this, and actually I have to say it's absolutely
nice. Great. And loads of blokes I know drink rosé as well. It's like, don't we, Aaron? Loads of blokes at the office drink rosé. But and the thing is, it's a serious wine style, and sometimes in the summer, not today, but sometimes those hot days and warm days, even a white wine is too challenging. You don't really want that challenge, and that's where rosé is fantastic. Sorry.
Is it always seen as a girly drink?
I don't think so. I said that just as but it used to be, I think, but now I don't think it is so much. I think it's becoming much more serious, and as people get used to tasting the different styles and get exposed to different wine styles, basically it is being more embraced as absolutely. Sorry? All right. Well, listen, guys, thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of the festival, and thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Lynne, for appearing again on the podcast. For me, your 2 episodes really show that somebody with an amazing wine knowledge can still communicate in a really clear and accessible way to the general public. I have, of course, left below the website and main social media handles for O'Brien's Wine. And of course, while you're at it, why not follow along with me, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, and email hello@interpretingwine.com. Next time on the podcast, episode 300 sees the end of this very special Wine and Cheese Festival series. But we go out in style as the episode features John Wilson speaking all about chilled reds. See you then.